The rain fell in heavy sheets, drumming against the rusted tin roof of Eli's small garage, a relentless downpour that mirrored the storm raging in his heart. It was late, far past the hour when any sensible person would be out in this weather, and Eli sat alone on a stool by his workbench, staring at the worn wedding band on his finger. His hands, calloused and stained with grease, trembled as he traced the ring's familiar curve, the only piece of her he had left. 3 years ago, the world had taken his Sarah, his light, his reason, leaving him in a darkness no amount of work could fix. The garage, once a place of pride where he'd built a life fixing cars and dreams, now felt like a tomb, each wrench and bolt a reminder of a life that no longer existed. On this night, as thunder cracked the sky, Eli felt the weight of his loneliness more than ever, unaware that fate was about to pull him from the shadows and into a moment that would change everything. Before we dive into this story, I want to ask you to join us in spreading hope and compassion. If you believe in the power of kindness, second chances, and the beauty of the human spirit, please hit that like button, drop a comment, share this video, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your support helps us share stories that remind the world of the good still left in it. Now, let's step into Eli's world, where a single act of courage begins to rewrite a broken man's story. Eli's life hadn't always been this way. Once, the garage had been alive with the hum of engines and the warmth of Sarah's laughter. She'd bring him coffee in the mornings, her smile brighter than the sun filtering through the shop's dusty windows. They'd dreamed of a simple life, kids, a small house, maybe a dog, built on the foundation of their love and Eli's skill with machines. But cancer doesn't care about dreams. It came swiftly, stealing Sarah in months, leaving Eli with nothing but bills, an empty bed, and a heart too heavy to carry. The garage, once a symbol of their shared future, became his refuge and his prison. He worked late into the nights, fixing cars for the few customers who still came, not for money but to keep his hands busy, to keep the grief at bay. The townsfolk of Willow Creek pitied him, their whispers following him like shadows. Poor Eli, lost his wife, lost his way. He didn't care what they thought. He didn't care about much at all anymore. That night, the storm was worse than usual, the kind that turned roads to rivers and kept even the bravest indoors. Eli should have closed up hours ago, but the thought of returning to his empty apartment was unbearable. He was tinkering with a carburetor, the radio playing softly in the background, when he heard it, a faint, desperate pounding at the garage door. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the sound came again, insistent, human. Frowning, he wiped his hands on a rag and crossed the oil-stained floor, his boots echoing in the quiet. He unlatched the heavy door and pushed it open, the wind nearly knocking him back. There, standing in the rain, was a woman in a wedding dress, soaked to the bone, her face streaked with tears and mascara, her eyes wide with something between fear and desperation. She was young, maybe 30, her blonde hair plastered to her face, the white lace of her dress clinging to her shivering frame. The dress, once beautiful, was torn at the hem, mud splattered across its delicate fabric. She clutched a small purse, her knuckles white, and for a moment, she just stared at Eli, as if unsure whether he was friend or foe. Eli's first thought was that she looked like a ghost, a vision from some other life, but the raw panic in her eyes was all too real. He didn't know what to say, so he stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. She hesitated, then stumbled forward, collapsing against the doorframe as if her legs could no longer hold her. Eli caught her arm, steadying her, and led her inside, the door slamming shut against the storm. The woman's name, he would later learn, was Clara. She sat on an old wooden chair by the workbench, wrapped in a blanket Eli had pulled from his truck, her teeth chattering as she tried to speak. Eli didn't press her for answers, not yet. He'd learned from Sarah that sometimes silence was the kindest thing you could offer. Instead, he busied himself making coffee on the ancient machine in the corner, the kind Sarah used to tease him about keeping. The garage was warm, at least, the old heater humming in the background, and the smell of oil and metal mixed with the faint bitterness of brewing coffee. Clara's eyes darted around, taking in the cluttered shelves, the tools hanging on pegboards, the faded photo of Sarah pinned above the desk. Eli saw her looking and felt a pang in his chest, but he said nothing, just handed her the mug. Clara's story came out in fragments, each word heavy with pain. She'd been set to marry that day, a man named James, someone she'd loved, or thought she loved, since college. The wedding was supposed to be perfect, planned down to the last detail, a celebration of a future she'd believed in. But hours before the ceremony, she'd found him with another woman, someone she'd considered a friend. The betrayal had shattered her, but it was what came after that drove her into the storm. James hadn't just cheated, he'd turned cruel, mocking her tears, threatening her when she said she'd leave. Afraid and humiliated, Clara had fled the venue, running into the rain with nowhere to go, her phone dead, her heart broken. She'd seen the faint light of Eli's garage from the road, a beacon in the dark, and something had told her to keep going, to knock. Eli listened, his hands still, his heart aching in a way he hadn't felt since Sarah. He knew loss, knew the way it could hollow you out, make you question everything you thought you were. Clara's pain was different but no less real, and as she spoke, he saw the weight of her shattered dreams, the way they mirrored his own. He wanted to tell her it would be okay, that time would dull the edges, but he knew better than to offer empty promises. Instead, he asked if she had somewhere safe to go. She shook her head, her eyes filling again. Her family was states away, her friends tied to James, and she had no one in Willow Creek. For a moment, Eli felt the old urge to retreat, to keep his distance, to protect the fragile walls he'd built around his grief. But something in Clara's eyes, maybe the same spark he'd once seen in Sarah's, stopped him. He offered her his apartment above the garage. It wasn't much, just a small space with a bed, a kitchenette, and a bathroom, but it was dry and safe. Clara protested at first, saying she couldn't impose, but Eli insisted, his voice quiet but firm. He didn't know why he cared so much, why this stranger's pain felt like his own, but he couldn't turn her away. He gave her a pair of his old sweatpants and a flannel shirt, both too big for her, and showed her to the apartment, promising to stay in the garage until morning. As he closed the door behind her, he felt something shift inside him, a crack in the armor he'd worn for 3 years. He didn't sleep that night, sitting instead by the workbench, staring at Sarah's photo, wondering what she'd think of him now. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Clara emerged from the apartment, her face pale but composed, the wedding dress replaced by Eli's oversized clothes. She thanked him quietly, her voice steadier now, and said she'd figure out her next steps. Eli nodded, unsure what to say, but offered to check her car, which she'd left a mile down the road when it stalled in the rain. It was a small sedan, waterlogged and stubborn, but Eli knew cars better than he knew people. He towed it to the garage and spent the day working on it, refusing Clara's offer to pay. She stayed nearby, watching him work, asking small questions about the tools, the process, the garage itself. Her curiosity surprised him, and for the first time in years, he found himself talking, really talking, about the life he'd once had. Days turned into weeks, and Clara didn't leave. She found a job at the local diner, a place where the coffee was strong and the tips were decent, and she rented a room in town. But she kept coming back to the garage, bringing Eli sandwiches, asking about his day, filling the space with a warmth he'd forgotten. He taught her how to change oil, how to spot a bad spark plug, and she listened with a focus that made him feel seen. Slowly, without either of them meaning to, they built something, a friendship, fragile but real, rooted in shared pain and quiet moments. Eli started to notice the world again. The way the light hit the hills outside Willow Creek, the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of Clara's laugh when he told a bad joke. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was hope, and that was more than he'd had in years. The suspense came not from danger but from the slow unraveling of their walls. Clara was still haunted by James, by the fear that she'd never trust again. Eli wrestled with his guilt, the feeling that moving forward was a betrayal of Sarah. There were moments when they'd sit in silence, each lost in their own ghosts, but those moments grew fewer. One evening, as they sat on the garage steps watching the sunset, Clara told Eli about her dream to open a bakery, something she'd abandoned for James. Eli, hesitant at first, offered to help her fix up an old van for a mobile bakery, using his skills to give her a new start. It was his way of saying he believed in her, that he saw her strength even when she didn't. The project became their shared purpose. They worked late into the nights, sanding rust, rebuilding the engine, painting the van a soft yellow that Clara said reminded her of hope. The town noticed, too, their whispers shifting from pity to curiosity, then admiration. Eli and Clara didn't care about the gossip, they were too busy building something new. When the van was finished, Clara baked her first batch of cookies in the diner's kitchen and sold them from the van's window, Eli standing proudly nearby, his hands still stained with paint. The smile on her face that day was brighter than any he'd seen, and it stirred something in him he thought was gone forever. Months later, on a crisp autumn evening, Clara invited Eli to the van's official opening. The town square was alive with lights and music, the air sweet with the smell of her pastries. Clara wore a simple dress, no trace of the wedding gown that had brought her to Eli's door, and her eyes shone with a joy that felt like a gift. As they stood together, watching people line up for her baked goods, Eli realized he wasn't just proud of her, he was grateful. Grateful for the storm that had brought her to him, for the chance to be more than a broken man in a garage. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he wanted to find out. This story of Eli and Clara is a reminder that even in our darkest moments, kindness can light the way. If their journey touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks to keep these stories alive. Your support means the world to us and to everyone who believes in second chances. Before we end, I have one special request. In the comments below, share a moment when a small act of kindness changed your life or someone else's. Let's fill this space with stories of hope and connection. Thank you for being here, and may you always find light in the storm.